In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest, or most unsettling experience of your life? Please do like, share, and subscribe. 15 years old. I had just got home from work, so I went to my bedroom to change out of my work clothes and get ready for bed. I'm in the middle of undressing when I look to my bedroom window to catch my reflection, and I see a man's face. I dropped to the floor and turned off the lights, scrambling to get dressed, still watching the window. The face is gone, but I'm still watching. Then, a fucking camera. No face, just a camera pointed at me sitting on the floor. I bolt from my room and tell my mom and brother. My brother went outside, and our ladder from the backyard was lying there, but nobody around. Couldn't sleep for a year after that, just stared at that window. Haven't thought about that in years. When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I'd spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read, something I used to do when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in, I shift a little to get comfortable, and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped my shit, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left on my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that I happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again though, nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself. I worked in a movie theater selling concessions, and this older man approaches the counter and orders me. I asked him, "Would you like anything else?" And he looks at me and says, "Every time I ask for the thing I want, they keep telling me it's illegal." I'm quite creeped out by this guy, and so I just sort of chuckle. He then proceeds to ask me, "Do you want to know what I ask?" Working in concessions, part of the job is making the moviegoers feel welcome, so I say sure. And then what he says to me was the most disturbing thing I've ever heard. He says, "You wouldn't have any young girls in the back over there locked up for me," he said as he's pointing to the closet. He then continued, "Because that's all I really want, a young girl. I mean, I wish I could just bring them back here and you'd keep them there locked up so I could just pick them up whenever I wanted. I like younger girls, you know." At this point, a line had already started forming behind him and he'd still not paid yet, so I told him the total of his order. He then asked me, "You understand, right?" And I didn't know what to say, so I just chuckled and agreed. Then he pulled out a $10 bill and said, "I like you," put it into the tip jar, and walked away. Not to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister to not call the police and to let her in. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later, and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. Apparently, the couple would do this act to get into people's homes. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew just creeps me out. Some real Clockwork Orange shit. One night, about 10 months ago, there was a pretty heavy snowstorm in my area. All of the roads were closed and a curfew was issued for everybody except emergency medical personnel. I'd been shoveling snow for most of the day and was dead tired come nightfall. Didn't have the energy to do much of anything besides eat dinner and lay down. I fire up some OG Star Trek and begin to doze off. A couple of hours later, around 1 a.m., I hear the sound of a door rattling and a slight whisper saying my name, Vladimir Bonin. I sit up a bit and realize it's coming from my parents' room, becoming fainter with the passing time. After 10 minutes or so, I gather up the courage to see what the hell is going on. Shitty folding knife in hand, I peek out into the hallway and don't see anything. The noise is still coming from the room next door, the rattling becoming more rushed as I approach. Cautiously, I open the door and sneak inside. It's pitch black and I can't see anything. My eyes are taking entirely too long to adjust to the darkness. I'm shuffling forward, and all of a sudden, something grabs and pulls on my leg. At this point, I was so freaked out I jumped back. As the whispers continued, I recognized my dad's voice. He was asking me for help. He had a stroke while walking to use the bathroom around 1 a.m. that night. After he fell, he was able to use his left foot to rattle the door to this bathroom. My mom fell asleep on the couch in the living room and wasn't around to help or hear. I was able to grab the house phone and call 911, and despite the weather, the police and an ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. That was the scariest night of my life. The doctors told us there wasn't much hope for my dad before going into surgery since he had a hemorrhagic stroke and there was a massive amount of bleeding. Fast forward 10 months and my old man is cognitively the same, just paralyzed on his right side. He had every infection under the sun while in the hospital, but he staved them off and is still with us today. He was my best friend before the incident and my hero after. TLDR. Heard some rattling and whispers, freaked out, found my dad lying on the ground after a massive stroke. This is not paranormal, but was immensely creepy at the time. I was visiting my hometown and decided to pick up my old high school friend from his house and take him to dinner and a drink to catch up. He's kinda stressed and tells me that his ex, with whom he had broken up with over 2 years prior, had been stalking him and harassing him. I drive him home afterwards, and it starts to drizzle. As I drop him off at his house, the neighborhood was dark and quiet by now. We both notice a bag tied to my side view mirror. It was likely attached when we were at the restaurant. We open it to see a poorly taken photo of a tree taken at night with a flash. There was a brief letter, obviously written from his ex, that said, "I buried our first love letter under this tree years ago. This tree is growing from our love." I made sure my friend got into his house all right and got the heck out of there. When I was 16 in the mid-90s, aka the I know everything, I'm invincible, and you can't stop me age, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight. Can't remember what about, but I decided fuck it, I was going home. I lived about 5 miles away, but I didn't have a car, and since it was 2 a.m. there were no buses. I was going to walk home. In the middle of the night, though a not so safe as it seemed neighborhood, as a tiny 16-year-old girl. So I did. I think in hindsight my friends either didn't believe I was going to do it or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started hoofing it. About a mile out, the suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street with highway access. I started to notice a grayish minivan following me. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later, it would do the same thing. I mean, really obvious what it was doing. I crossed over to the other side of the street, so I was walking the opposite of traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. It kept doing it on the other side of the street. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour Fred Meyer, West Coast USA chain grocery all-purpose store, lights bright, but parking lot empty-ish. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went to head inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here. Just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know what I was doing. I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a dark car that was following you. A couple of times you went to turn around or stopped, so it started following you down a parallel side street. When I saw it, I started to follow you both, just to make sure you were safe. Go inside the store and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you headed across the lot." He waited until I was inside the store and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I just let the night cashier know what was going on and hung out with her for about an hour and a half. Then I finished the walk home. I've never forgotten the incident, or the man, whoever he was. During the walk, I never saw the dark car he mentioned, but I've always been convinced he saved my life that night. Back when I worked night shift as a security guard, I would experience mild hallucinations due to my poor sleep schedule. I was doing my patrol and I was feeling particularly out of it, so I kept getting those flashes of movement in the corner of my eye, but I was convinced it was just my brain fucking up. At the site I was working, there's a large warehouse filled with chemical waste that has only one light on it. As I'm going along, I see a pale shape on the ground and quickly recognize it as a body. My adrenaline spikes and I nearly pass out. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a CPR dummy that workers left out for training. I was sitting in our office room home alone when I was 19. I was typing a paper for one of my college classes. The office room used to be my sister's room before she moved out, so a lot of her decorations are still there. She had a photo of a mountain range, an oval-shaped mirror, and 3 different hangings that read faith, hope, and love. This makes 5 total things hanging on the wall in the room. Suddenly, I got random chills, which happens all the time. It was pretty cold, but this time, as soon as I got the chills, everything in the room hanging on the walls fell off simultaneously. This really freaked me out, but it got a tiny bit worse. I got up and walked out of the room, only to notice everything hanging on a wall in my house had fallen, besides the television in my room. All the pictures in the living room and other rooms, all the trophies in my room from Little League sports, and even a stand that held candles. I wasn't sure what to do. I picked up all the stuff and hung it back up, which actually took me around 15 to 20 minutes. Then I drove to campus to finish my paper. Never told my parents. It's also worth mentioning this happened around noon on a sunny day 3 winters ago. Growing up, my bedroom was the only one that faced the front of the house or street. When I was about 8 or 9, I woke up to my dad calmly but firmly telling me to get up, go in the bathroom, and shut the door. I was annoyed because I was half asleep, but I listened. Apparently, I was more tired than I realized because I fell asleep on the bathroom floor. The next morning, I asked my mom what happened. She seemed oblivious and confused. I looked at my dad like she was crazy, and I asked him why he had woken me up. He denied doing it. I was becoming frustrated to the point of tears, but I ultimately let it go. Fast forward to college. I was home one break, and I decided to ask again. I had thought of that night off and on for years, and it still bothered me. This time, my dad goes, "Ha! I was wondering if you even remembered that." Turns out that a lot of houses on our block were being vandalized and robbed all those years ago. Someone had broken into the garage and was inside the house. My room was partially over the garage. My dad heard it happen and quietly got me to safety. Police were called, the guy ran. He was never caught, however, and my parents didn't want a terrified kid on their hands, so for years they pretended like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't supernatural, but it was unsettling, for sure. The most unsettling incident in my life, well, one of them, would be during family dinner when I was about 8 years old. My mom suddenly came out with, "It took me months to get your father's bloodstains out of the wall." The smell of his body was terrible and really clung too, and then gazed off into the distance, utterly unaware of how shocking and unconducive to eating such a remark would be. My dad committed suicide not long after they split up. He did it in the kitchen of our flat while we were staying at Grandma and Grandpa's house. Someone, presumably my dad, also turned the thermostat up to max before he died. He wasn't found for several weeks either, so yeah, I can imagine it was quite a horrific scene. My impression was that Mom was psychologically damaged by going through that, and as a result, she lost any sense of what was appropriate to share with the child or not. Sometimes I do wonder if he was murdered, and that's why the thermostat was cranked to the max. And also, no one bothered to check on a man who was known to be suicidal and alone in a house, not going to work and failing to show up for his psych appointments for 3 weeks. At the least, it was neglectful. Sometimes it's hard hugging my mom when I have suspicions that she had a greater role in my dad's death than she will ever admit to. I know how clever and scheming she can be, but I will never know for sure. And I know how hurtful and angry I get when someone else thinks they know that I'm guilty of something and I know I'm innocent, so I try to keep it buried. On my previous job, when our building was still under construction, the only floors that were occupied were the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th, and 7th. One time, I was alone inside the elevator, going from the 1st to the 6th floor, when suddenly it stopped and opened on the 3rd floor. Normally, I would just disregard it, but rumors were all over that a ghost child was playing around on the vacant floors, so I pressed the closed button as fast as I could. When it closed, I heard noises like someone was tapping their fingers on the walls of the elevator. I was home alone once when my parents were out of town. We had just moved into our house, so there was an empty lot next to our house with a house half built. My parents were the types to leave the outdoor side garage door unlocked. Dumbasses, I know. Well, while they were gone, I was watching TV, and all of a sudden the door that leads into my garage from the inside starts to wiggle. I put my TV on mute and I listen again. I see it actually move that time. I start freaking out, and I'm kind of in shock looking for the phone. Can't find the house phone, so I search for my cell. Remember, I left my charger in my parents' car, so I'm frantically looking for the house phone. Our house was so new, my mom hadn't even put blinds or drapes up in the kitchen or living room. Well, whoever was wiggling my garage doorknob starts banging on the windows in my living room. Again, no blinds or phone, and at that moment, I realize this guy is seeing my every move, so I shoot upstairs. Again, looking frantically for the phone, and also trying to figure out how and where I'd jump out of my house to get away from this maniac that's outside my house if I needed to. He then starts pounding on my front door. I can tell at that point he's using something metal or plastic by the sound of the thumps. I really thought he was going to shoot my door open. I remember at that moment I was pissed at myself for being a dumbass teenager that frequently talked on the phone because I always just left it lying around, never putting it back on the base. I wanted so badly to push the button that detects where my house phone is, but I thought if he heard where it was, he'd break the window nearest to it and take it. I then remembered I left the phone in my mom's room, and as I passed the hallway to her room, I see two people pacing in front of my house. I'm freaking out, trying to find my dad's gun in my parents' bedroom. I find the phone and call 911. As I'm on the phone, the window breaks. I'm upstairs and am scared to death. Suddenly, everything goes silent. I'm waiting in my parents' pitch black closet for what seems like an eternity. Then I hear the sirens. Cops show up, but there is no one to be found. I figured that they hadn't gone too far since it had just occurred. Cops never found my tormentors. On the plus side, the company building the house next door, same company that built ours, hired overnight security to stay on our street until the house was built, which was definitely refreshing. My friend died in a car accident, and they towed the car pretty early in the day. We were teens, so we thought we should go collect all her things that were ejected from the car when she hit the tree. After about a half hour, I was overwhelmed and just sat down and started crying. I had my two friends with me cleaning stuff up, and they just let me get it out for a bit. Someone started rubbing my shoulders in the deepest massage I've ever had, and it was really helping me get control of myself and relaxing me. I let them rub for a few minutes, and then I put my hand on theirs to let them know I was appreciative. There was no hand, just my shoulder. I turned around to say thank you to whoever it was, and there was nobody. I looked up at the car, and my two friends were standing there talking about something. Something had been touching me. I ran to the car and asked my friends if it was them. They looked at me like I was crazy. I made everyone get in the car super fast, and we left. I think a spirit was comforting me in my loss, and I'm grateful and freaked out for it. I can still remember how it felt, and it's been 22 years. I was on a small base in Afghanistan in 2003, just outside of Kabul, right before you got into the mountains heading toward Pakistan. It was an Al-Qaeda camp before we bombed the shit out of it and took it over. We established an observation post, guard tower, on the roof of one of the buildings that was still standing. It was about 5 stories and nothing but concrete, no windows, no doors, though there were spaces where they once were, and debris that made it look like it may have been an office building, hasty medical facility. Then, you go into the bathrooms, dried blood everywhere, clogging the drains on the floor, in the urinals, in the toilets, bloody handprints and spatters on the wall. The blood had even pooled on the floor due to clogged drains and hardened in place. This was every bathroom in the building. They were clearly used to slaughter people. At night, if you sat and listened, you would start to hear crying. I don't believe in God, an afterlife, or anything really that you can't provide concrete proof of. I heard that shit, and I can't explain it other than to say I had heard stories of it from people and gave it a try. So maybe it was all in my head. I sat on the stairs, middle of the building, maybe 3rd or 4th floor, and didn't hear anything for a while, sort of thinking it was bullshit. Then I started to hear it. I thought maybe I was being fucked with, so I decided to go search where I thought I heard it coming from. I go left and start looking. It wasn't a very complex building. A few big rooms on either side that were easily sparsely scattered with debris. Easy to see they were empty. No one in the bathrooms. I stop to hone in on the sound. It's coming from the other end of the building. Still could be someone messing with me. So I head over there for a look. Same thing. Nothing. I listen again, and it's back to coming from the opposite side of the building. I decided at that point that, real or joke, I'm out. Everyone heard it. We all eventually just ignored it. Could have been the wind, the pipes, or lots of other things. Still was creepy at the time. One day, my friend and I decided to go camping at a hot spring that was closed due to a recent fire. We arrived there and set up our tent. It was about 8 p.m. We stripped completely naked and went up to the hot spring. I brought a machete and a bag of goldfish. We had to climb up to it, and the only way going down was going back the slippery way we came. We hung there for about 2.5 hours when a flashlight came on from above our heads. There was someone right above us. Keep in mind, it's 10:30 at a closed down site when it's pitch black, so we are in the worst possible position. Wet, naked, cold, alone, dark, and all we have is a machete and a bag of goldfish. Well, this person walks around the area for about 45 with a flashlight before it suddenly stops. My friend and I still decide to stay there for a bit, and now it is 1. Then we run out when it's 30 degrees, so we're shivering cold. We get our pants and unlaced shoes on. He packs up our tent while I walk around with a machete on watch. Then we begin to run through the back burnt forest, and since we were so scared, we thought that everything was something. I thought the wind was a distant laugh or a branch was a face, but eventually we made it back to the car after an hour of traversing the forest. A week later on the news, a dead body was found in the river nearby. One time, when I was in middle school, I fell asleep on the couch in our living room. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up and saw a man walk through the wall adjoining our living room to my brother's bedroom. The man noticed me and turned to face me. He had half of his face missing, as if he had been dragged along the highway. He put his finger to his lips, as if to tell me not to tell anyone, and then turned forward and walked through our glass door out into the yard. Obviously freaked out, I ran into my brother's room to find an empty bed. I run screaming and crying to my parents, and they freak out and start calling all my brother's friends' houses trying to find them. When they finally got in touch with him, they found out he had been at a college party drinking about an hour away. My dad went to pick my brother and his best friend up, not wanting them to drive home drunk. The next day, we found out that the kid who was originally going to drive my brother home was killed when he was ejected from his car during a drunk driving incident.